Donald Trump has delivered a major salvo in his trade war, this time aimed squarely at Canada. In a letter addressed to Prime Minister Mark Carney and posted on social media, Trump said the U.S. will charge Canada a tariff of 35% on Canadian.
The government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach, A
colossal $22 billion economic shockwave has just rocked North America's supply chain. Following President Trump's decision to impose a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, Ottawa swiftly retaliated with an identical 50% tariff on $22 billion worth of American products. The fallout is immediate. Electric vehicle motors, Detroit pickup truck frames, and even the aluminum cans Americans open daily are now surging in price. With U.S. consumers already grappling with inflation, their wallets are taking an unprecedented hit. Swift, severe, and direct. Could the White House's move be undermining its own electric vehicle ambitions, turning a vision of EV leadership into a domestic setback? Stay tuned for today's video. Within just 48 hours, Carney signed a retaliatory order, imposing tariffs on a $22 billion basket of U.S. goods, dismissing the White House's national security rationale as baseless protectionism grounded in flawed data. Canada's Finance Ministry published a detailed list of 284 targeted items, including electric vehicle motors, F-Series pickup steel frames, and aluminum coils for beverage cans, all now subject to punitive duties. The total value amounts to 30 billion Canadian dollars, equivalent to roughly 22 billion US dollars. The impact ripples instantly across North America's supply chain. Canada supplies 90% of the steel and 50% of the aluminum used by U.S. firms, while Canada imports up to 1/5 of America's steel exports. The cost spike is evident on invoices. Imported EV motor prices jumped 12% in just 3 trading days. On the Chicago Board of Trade, aluminum beer can sheet hit $3,500 per ton, a peak not seen since 2022. Beverage companies have already signaled they may need to rethink summer discount strategies. Carney's response went beyond tariffs. He mandated that every steel shipment entering Canada provide comprehensive data on its origin, from furnace and mine to CO2 emissions per ton, proving Canadian steel's cleaner profile, powered by 94% hydroelectric energy. Analysts describe this as a climate-driven strategy, aligning with ESG trends and positioning U.S. coal-fired steel at a disadvantage in potential WTO disputes. Additionally, Ottawa rolled out a $1.5 billion USD emergency fund to bolster Quebec's smelting capacity and protect jobs. However, just 7 days after the announcement, the Aluminum Association of Canada reported that loan applications had nearly exhausted the fund, prompting discussions of additional financial support. If the U.S. persists with its 50% tariff, smelters risk running out of cash before winter. Addressing concerns about dwindling funds, Carney declared, "We won't retreat. We'll escalate strategically, hinting at broader tariff hikes or strict quotas on U.S. steel and aluminum if Washington doesn't back down by the July 21st deadline." As U.S. EV manufacturers scramble for motors and battery components, the White House faces a dilemma. Its 50% tariff, intended to pressure Canada, has backfired, threatening its goal of leading the domestic EV market. If negotiations falter, tariffs could rise to 70% on both sides, with the Bank of Canada projecting a 0.8% GDP loss for North America within 6 months. Investors are on edge, wondering who will yield first: Trump, navigating election year inflation, or Carney, positioning himself as Canada's steadfast defender. The retaliation has already sparked chaos. Within 24 hours of Canada's counter-tariffs, the Midwest Cold-Rolled Steel Index, critical for pickup frames and EV shells, surged by $60 per short ton, reaching $1,600 per ton, the highest since mid-2022. Aluminum followed suit, with the Midwest Premium, used for battery anodes and beer can sheets, soaring 54% to a 58 cents per pound high, about $1,270 per ton, on June 2nd, an 8-month peak. Goldman Sachs predicts it could hit 70 cents per pound as the 50% tariff fully impacts the supply chain. The packaging industry is reeling. Companies like Ball, Crown, and Modelo have raised alarms, noting that aluminum cans and beer now face a 25% surcharge on top of steel and aluminum duties, driving costs into double-digit increases within 3 days and fueling grocery aisle inflation. Detroit feels the heaviest blow. Ford disclosed that its new labor contract adds roughly $850 to each vehicle's cost, primarily for F-Series pickups, before accounting for the 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. A sobering J.D. Power report from April 23rd projects that automakers will absorb 70% of the cost increase to maintain sales, eroding profit margins at Ford, GM, and Tesla before Canadian consumers feel the impact. Even if costs are passed on, there's a limit. Anderson Economic Group estimates U.S. consumers will face over $30 billion in added costs in the first year from car and parts tariffs alone. In the pickup segment, costs could rise by $8,000 per vehicle, nearly 10 times the $850 Ottawa estimated for raw materials. Yet this burden falls on corporate profits, not Canadian consumers. The EV sector faces a harsher reality. Samsung SDI reports that imported battery materials, like aluminum-coated anode foil and copper separator film, are driving up costs at factories in Indiana and Michigan. While it's unclear if Tesla, Rivian, or GM Ultium will raise prices, second quarter margins are expected to be razor-thin due to the tariffs. With the IRA's $7,500 green tax credit per vehicle, rising steel and aluminum costs could nullify this incentive, effectively turning it into a penalty and undermining U.S. electrification goals. In just 1 week, North America has faced a dual crisis: skyrocketing raw material costs, chaos in packaging, and automakers absorbing 70% of the cost to keep sales afloat. Analysts call it a $22 billion economic quake, but with prices still climbing, this may be just the first tremor. 3 weeks after trading 50% tariff blows with the U.S., Prime Minister Carney unveiled a $4.8 billion CED Green Steel Fund. This massive investment didn't come out of nowhere. The ArcelorMittal Dofasco conversion project in Hamilton has already consumed $1.8 billion CED, while Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie received $420 million Canadian dollars to transition to electric arc furnaces (EAF). The rest comes from the $8 billion Canadian dollars net zero accelerator framework, now prioritizing steel and EV battery production. Roughly $2.2 billion CAD has been allocated to these two major mills, with Carney pledging to deploy the remaining $2.6 billion within 18 months to slash North American steel's carbon footprint by 60% by 2030. In return, Canada's steel industry must transform amid the tariff storm. Dofasco will abandon blast furnaces for hydrogen-fired DRIEF systems, cutting 3 million tons of CO2 annually. Algoma aims to use 70% recycled scrap, making Ontario a key supplier for Detroit's EV chain. The Finance Ministry requires every ton of subsidized steel to include a carbon passport, detailing, or energy and emissions per coil. Thus, Carney counters the White House's tariffs while reshaping the metallurgy landscape, leveraging Quebec's hydroelectric-powered EFs, green hydrogen DRI in Labrador, and a pellet export route to Japan and Korea. Yet, technology alone isn't enough. On March 13th, Canada filed WTO case DS-635 against the U.S. for removing steel and aluminum exemptions and imposing 50% tariffs. Despite the WTO's appellate body being stalled since 2019 due to U.S. judge blocking, Carney calls the case a strategic move to prepare for multilateral retaliation. The Commerce Department has quietly shared evidence with Tokyo and Seoul, both hit with 25% U.S. tariffs on July 8th. If these clean steel economies file joint WTO cases, the political pressure could challenge Trump's America First narrative. Domestically, Carney set a trap. Starting July 21st, all federal infrastructure contracts must use Canadian steel and aluminum, while third country import quotas block Chinese steel rerouted through the U.S. This forces Ford, GM, Tesla, and beverage giants to choose between U.S. parts hit by Canada's 50% tariffs or sourcing green materials from Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie. Carney's strategy is threefold: matching tariffs to inflict pain, green investments to modernize mills, and legal pressure to encircle the U.S. The aim isn't just to de-escalate the metal war, but to reposition Canada's clean steel, aluminum, and battery casings as critical EV supply chain components. If Washington doesn't relent before the election, each U.S. pickup will bear an extra $850 Canadian in material costs, while Canada ramps up zero-carbon steel exports to Europe, capitalizing on the EU's carbon border tax. In this high-stakes trade game, Carney's mantra is clear: transform crisis into opportunity. The $4.8 billion CD boost may signal a larger storm brewing, but positions Ottawa as a clean steel leader as the EV market surges. Trump faces a critical choice: ease tensions with Canada or watch U.S. consumers pay more for beer cans and pickups during campaign season. In conclusion, Canada has flipped the script. With pricier cans and stalling EV production, the question looms: who absorbs the 50% tariff, consumers or the Made in USA label? Carney sees the vulnerability, setting up a strategic play.